Welcome to Math with Mr. Katykhin. So today we're going to be looking at proportions and how to solve them. A couple of definitions you should already know is solving an equation. The definition for that is to find a value or values of a variable or variables that make an equation true. That means when we plug in a certain value for an x, for example, and we get the left side equaling the right side. A ratio, in other terms, is a fraction. It's a comparison of two things. There's a couple of examples where we can say A to B. That's a ratio. That's comparing A to B. A divided by B or A semicolon B, that's also comparison. And obviously the fraction one, which is A divided by B. The bad habit that students have is say A over B, which is not true. It should be A divided by B. That's what that symbol means. A proportion is two fractions equaling to each other, or two ratios that are equivalent. So here's a great example of that. As you can see, proportion. Here's an example of that, where we have a fraction on the left is equaling to a fraction on the right. Couple more examples that we may use, and you should be writing this down. Couple examples you can also use is, for example, x plus 4 divided by 3 is equal to, for example, 1/2. Now that is also a proportion, because as you can see on the left side you have a fraction, even though it has x plus 4, but remember that is held together by a plus sign, so it's a group. You have a numerator divided by a denominator is equal to a numerator divided by a denominator. One example that I want to show you that is not a proportion, or is not considered to be a proportion, is something like this, where you have, for example, x divided by 4 plus 3/4 is equaling to, let's say, 3 divided by x. This is not a proportion. So make sure you don't confuse that, because you have two fractions added together and equaling to one fraction. A proportion is a fraction equaling another fraction. So keep that in mind as we go through today's lesson. Cross product property. This is something students always confuse. They want to multiply when we have two fractions multiplying. They want to use this cross product property. But again, a cross product property can only be used with proportions. And again, that's a statement to say that when you have a fraction on the left side equaling a fraction on the right side, you can cross multiply. You can cross multiply. A times D will give you AD is equal to B times C, which give you BC. And remember, B and D cannot equal to 0 because they're in the denominator. Therefore, if there were 0, they would be undefined. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at this. So for the first thing they are asking us to do is go ahead and solve each equation. And then they want us to check our solution. And those are going to be key things that we do when we are working on proportions. I'm going to do 3 examples. Then the sub will pause the video and you can work on the 3 examples from there on. And then we'll show the answers to those 3 examples. Let's start with the first 3. Because we have a proportion, we can actually go ahead and cross multiply. Now what this means is we can actually take x times 5, which is 5x. Notice I still have an equal sign. That's still there. It does not disappear. And then 6 times 10 would be 60. So now this is a one-step equation. To solve for x, to get x by itself, remember we need to highlight the variable we're solving for. Then they're being multiplied. Opposite of that will be to divide by 5. Divide by 5. 5 divided by 5 will be positive 1. which leaves you with x is equaling, and then 5 goes into 60 12 times, so we get 12 as our solution. So x is equal to 12. We can always check our solution by substituting the answer. So I'm going to use a green pen to do that. And again, if I do that, I'll replace x with, remember that's called, the term is called substitution. We're going to substitute 12 in place of x. Divided by 10 is equal to 6 divided by 5. Again, since it's a proportion, go ahead and multiply those. As you can see, 15 times 5, or 12 times 5 is 60. And then 10 times 6 is also 60. Notice the left side is equal to the right side. Therefore, we do have the correct answer. Let's look at our next example. Again, as a proportion, we're going to go ahead and cross multiply. It really does not matter if I take 8 times 15 or x times 6 first. It's just a preference, whatever you want to do first. I prefer to multiply the variable with the number. So I'm going to take 6 times x is equal to 8 times 15. So now 6 times x will be 6x is equal to, again, equal sign still stays in the middle, 8 times 15. From here, what you would do is you would actually go ahead and multiply 8 times 5. That would be 40. So you write down 0, carry the 4. 8 times 1 is 8, and then adding that 4 gives you 12. So we get 8 times 15 is 120. Again, to get x by itself, because that's what we're solving for, we're going to go ahead and divide by 6 on both sides. Divide by 6 on both sides. 6 divided by 6 is going to be 1. And you get x is equal to 120 divided by 6. Well, 6 goes into 12 2 times. And then adding a 0 will give you 20. As you can see, we need to go ahead and check our solution. We're going to take 8 divided by, we're again using substitution, that's 20, is equal to 6 times, or divided by 15. So again, using cross multiplication, we would get 8 times 15 is equal to 20 times 6. 8 times 15, as we already said, is 120. And 20 times 6 is also 120. So there we go, that they are equal, and the left side is equal to the right. Same thing here, we're solving for x, but before we can solve for x, we need to go ahead and cross multiply. By doing that, we get 7 times x is equal to, again, our equal sign just comes down, 3 times 12. As you can see, we get that. So if we continue on, 7 times x would be 7x. 3 times 12 will give us 36. So now we're solving for x, so we're going to have x by itself. So we need to divide by 7 on both sides. So when I divide 7 on both sides, 7 divided by 7 is going to be 1. That gives us a positive 1, which leaves us with 1 times x, which is x. Now the question is, does 7 go into 36 evenly? Well, from what we know, that it doesn't. So we got a couple of choices. We can either change it to a mixed number. We can leave it as improper fraction, at least in my class you can. Or we can do it as a decimal. I'm going to go ahead and leave it as 36 divided by 7. So we know 7 does go into 36 5 times. So if you want to do 5 and 1/7, you can. But again, you can also leave it as improper fraction. At least in my class you can. So now we need to go ahead and check our solution. To check our solution, it's a fraction, so it's going to be a little bit more work to do that, but we can do that no problem. So let's go ahead and do that. We get, remember x is 36 seventh divided by 12. So we want to make sure we take the time to make this complex fraction into just one fraction. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to erase the highlighted stuff. So as you can see, we cannot divide fractions. So what we need to do is we need to make sure we multiply by the reciprocal. So we actually get 3/7 is equal to 36 divided by 7 times the reciprocal of that would be 1/12. So now, as you can see, we can simplify those, and you get 1, and this would be 3. So what we're actually getting is 3/7 is equal to 3/7. Clearly, those are equal, but if you wanted to go a step further and cross multiply, you would realize that 7 times 3 would be 21, and 3 times 7 will be also 21. So again, clearly we can see that 3/7 is equal to 3/7, but if you wanted to go a step further, you could use cross product to multiply those out. So right now what I want you to do is go ahead and take a minute, take about 4 to 5 minutes to do these 3 problems, and the video will be paused and then for about 4 or 5 minutes, and then we will go through, they'll play the video again and I will go through the work. I'm actually going to start right now, but in class this video will be paused for a couple of minutes for you to actually get a chance to do those problems on your own. Hopefully you had time to do these problems on your own. Let's see how you should have done these problems. So again, cross multiplying, we would get 4 times x, which is 4x, 3 times 12, which would be 36. To get x by itself, you would go ahead and divide by 4. Divide by 4 on both sides. Remember, keeping that equation balanced. So 4 divided by 4 is going to be 1. You get x is equal to, and then 36 divided by 4 will be 9. Now you should be checking your solutions. Just to save time, I'm not going to go through the steps. I did that for the first 3, but you need to be checking your solutions. So now, during the next example, we're going to go ahead and do the same thing. We're going to take 6 times x, which is 6x, is equal to, well, 10 times 15 is actually 150. So again, solving for x, we need to get x by itself. Since they're multiplying, we're going to divide by 6 on both sides. 6 divided by 6 is positive 1, which actually gives us x is equal to. Now 150 divided by 6, there's a couple ways of doing that. 6 goes into 15. We know it has to go twice, so we can write down the 2. But then that's 12, which leaves us with 30, and 6 goes into 35 times. So 6 goes into 150 25 times. And again, you should be able to check that solution on your own if you need to. Next example, we start with cross multiplying, and what we get is x times 9, which is 9x, is equal to 2 times 15. Well, that's going to give us 30. Now to get x by itself, all we have to do is to, since 9 times x is being multiplied, to undo multiplication we divide by 9 on both sides. 9 divided by 9 will be 1. So what we get is we get x is equal to 30 divided by 9. Now, even though this is an improper fraction, I cannot leave it like this because it's not simplified. The reason it's not simplified, I can still simplify this, and I can actually continue simplifying that with both numbers top and bottom by 3. Therefore, x is equal to, well, 3 goes into 30 10 times, and then 3 goes into 9 3 times. So now this fraction is simplified. Therefore, I can leave my answer this way. I can leave my answer as 10 divided by 3. However, remember that I would not be able to leave my answer as 30 divided by 9 because that is not simplified. Now, if you wanted to leave it as a mixed number, you can as well. That will give you 9 and 1/3. You can also actually work through and divide that. And so actually will give you 3 and 1/3. And so that will also give you 3.333. Yes, repeating 3 3s. So if you want to leave it as your decimal. So the next few problems are going to be a little bit more challenging. So you have to solve each equation and then check your solutions as well. So the reason these are challenging is because, as you can see, we have to use additional properties to solve these. So let's go ahead and look at how we're going to do that. So let's start off with cross multiply. Now notice that in this problem I do have a fraction. I have a numerator divided by a denominator. And on the right side I also have a singular fraction, even though this is technically a group. So you have a top number divided by a bottom number. So there's a fraction equaling a fraction. So these are proportions. So this is a proportion. So we can cross multiply. When we do that, and again, remember what I said, it really does not matter if I go 4 times x minus 3 or I do 8 times x. But whatever you do, go ahead and write 8 times x is equal to 4 times x minus 3. If you have not realized this, we get something like this. I'm going to take an extra step here. 8 times x would be 8x. And on the right side, I have 4 times this whole thing. And if you haven't realized this yet, you should see that you need to use distributive property before we can continue with this problem. So we get 8x is equal to 4 times x, which is 4x. And always don't forget to multiply the second thing inside that parenthesis by 4 as well. That's 4 times negative 3, which is negative 12. Now you can solve for x. Notice there's x on both sides. What I always recommend is always move the smaller of the two. The 4x is smaller, so rather than having a positive form, I'm going to subtract 4x on both sides. And remember, when I say both sides, I mean on the right side of the equal sign and on the left side of the equal sign. 4x minus 4x is going to be 0, which leaves us with 4x is equal to negative 12. Remember that negative or that minus is with the 12, not the 4x. So now to get x by itself, since 4 times x, the inverse operation of that will be to divide by 4 on each side of the equation. So 4 divided by 4 is going to be 1. And we do get x is equal to negative 3. Now remember, what you want to do is you want to actually check your solution. So let's go take a second to do that. We have 4 divided by negative 3 is equal to 8 divided by negative 3 minus 3. So now let's go ahead and see what we get. We get 4 divided by negative 3 is equal to 8. Remember, change that to adding its opposite. The signs are the same, so you add and keep the sign. So negative 3 plus negative 3 is actually negative 6. And now cross multiply. Now when we do that, you get 4 times negative 6, which is negative 24, is equal to negative 3 times 8 is also negative 24. So that does work out. You see the left side equal on the right side. Therefore, you know x is negative 3. So let's continue with the next example. Again, cross multiply. So in this case, what I'll have is, I'm not going to do this extra step. I'm going to have 42 times x plus 4 is equal to, and again, 6 times 77. Now, if you have your calculator or not, but you can definitely use your calculator if you need to figure that out. 6 times 77 will be 462. Now, I used the calculator to make sure that was the correct answer. So let's go ahead and, as you can see on the left side, we can use distributive property to get those values. So now 42 times x, that's easy enough to know that it's 42x, plus 42 times 4, well, if we do that, 42 times 4 is actually going to give us 168. So that'll be 168 is equal to 462. Now notice this is a two-step equation which we covered. We need to solve for x. The first thing we have to do is subtract 168 from both sides. Subtract 168 from both sides. Well, when we subtract 168 from 168, that will actually give us 0, as you can see there. But then we have to take 462 and we have to subtract 168, and that gives us 294. So we get 42x is equal to 294. Again, to get x by itself, since it's being multiplied by 42, to undo multiplication, we're going to divide by 42 on both sides. Now notice 42 divided by 42 gives us 1. And so when you take 294 and you divide by 42, you get 7. So our answer is going to be x is equal to 7. So let's see if we can actually check our solution or see if we get the correct answer. We get 6 divided by, remember x is 7, so using substitution we get 7 plus 4 is equal to 42 divided by 77. Now notice here what we have to be careful of is this is a group is being brought together. So order of operation tells us we need to add those two things together. So we get 6 divided by 7 plus 4 would be 11 is equal to 42 divided by 77. Cross multiply the two values here. We get, well, we already did 6 times 77. We knew that was 462. Now the question is 42 times 11 also 462? And it is. So 462. So we do get the same value for both. Let's look at our next example. We're going to start off this problem with by cross multiplying. So when we cross multiply, we get the following. We get 18 times x minus 13 is equal to, again, equal sign is in the middle, 6 times x plus 13. As you can see, in this case, we actually use distributive property twice. Once on the left side, and we use distributive property again on the right side. So we have to be careful here. We have 18 times x, which is 18x. But notice we have negative 13 times 18. So when we do that, that gives us negative 234. Now 6 times x would be 6x plus, and again when we take 13 times 6, notice here we have positive times a positive, and that gives us positive 78. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get the x on one side first, and as I always say, get rid of the smaller of the two. So subtract 6x, subtract 6x on both sides. 6x minus 6x will give you 0. And now notice there's only x's on the left side, because 18x minus 6x will give you 12x minus 234 is equal to 78. Now notice in this problem what we need to do is we need to, this is a two-step equation now, so we need to add 234 first. So we're going to add 234 to both sides, add 234 to both sides. That gives us negative 234 plus 234 gives us 0. And then when we go ahead and add 78, so we have 12x is equal to 78 plus 234 is 312. Our next step, as you can see, we're multiplying x and 12. So to undo multiplication by 12, we're going to divide by 12 on both sides. When we do that, we get the following. 12 divided by 12 is going to be 1. And then dividing 312 by 12, we actually get x is equal to 26. Now let's go ahead and check our solution by plugging those values in. Remember, our x was 26, so we get 18 divided by, using substitution, we get 26 plus 13 is equal to 6 divided by 26 minus 13. So the first one we'll get is 18 divided by 26 plus 13 will be 39 is equal to 6 divided by, well, 26 minus 13 would actually be 13. So now the question, what is 18 times 13? Well, that's 234. Well, what's 39 times 6? That's also 234. So as you can see, we do get an equivalent left side and a right side. Let's go ahead and give you a few minutes to work on the next 3 examples. And so after that, I will go through the problems. So hopefully you had a chance to work on these problems, and now we're going to go ahead and see what our answers are going to be. Again, I'm just going to go work through the problems. I'm not actually going to take the time to check them, but you should also be checking those solutions, not just solving them, but also checking your solutions for these 3 problems. Let's go ahead and take the few minutes to do that. So again, I'm going to start with cross multiplying. I'm going to take 21 times x minus 14 is equal to 7 times x plus 18. So notice I have to use distributive property on the left side and on the right side. So when I do that, I get 21 times x, which is 21x, minus, well, negative 14 or minus 14 is actually negative 14 times 21 will give us negative 294. 7 times x will give us 7x. And since we have positive 18 times 7, positive 7, we get positive 126. So now I have x's on both sides. I will get rid of the smaller of the two x's. So I'm going to subtract 7x from both sides. Notice 7x minus 7x will give you 0. But 21x minus 7x will actually give you 14x. Don't forget the x there. Minus 294 is equal to 126. To solve for x, it's a two-step equation. So we're going to add 294 to both sides. Add 294 to both sides. Negative 294 plus positive 294 will give you 0. And so what you end up with is 14x on the left side. But 126 plus 294 is going to give us 420. Now remember, notice that what we have there is we're multiplying 14 and x. So we're going to go ahead and divide by 14 since it's being multiplied on both sides. So we have 420 divided by 14. Well, 14 divided by 14 is positive 1, so you get x is equal to 420 divided by 14 is actually going to give us 30. So what your answer should have been is x is equal to 30. Next example, we're going to go ahead and multiply those two. And again, this begins with the same thing. It does not matter which one you do first, either 2 times the 2x plus 14 or negative 3 times 4x plus 4. I'm going to start with 2 times 2x plus 14 is equal to, again, the equal sign is still there, negative 3 times 2x plus 14. So now using distributive property in both cases, the right side and the left side, we get the following. 2 times 2x is 4x plus 2 times 14 will be 28. Notice it's negative times 2x will be negative 6x. And then negative 3 times 14 will be negative 42. So make sure you don't lose that negative when you multiply those two numbers. Continue on. I have x's on both sides. So I'm going to get rid of the smaller of the two. Notice I have 4x and I have negative 6x. Negative 6x is smaller. To get rid of it, I'm going to add 6x to both sides. Add 6x to both sides. Well, adding those will give you 0, but adding the ones on the left will give you 10x plus 28 is equal to negative 42. This is a two-step equation. First thing we have to do is subtract 28 from both sides. Now positive 28 minus 28 will be 0. And on the left side we get 10x is equal to, because those signs are the same, you're actually going to be adding those two numbers. So when you add 28 and 42, you do get negative 70. And then, since you're multiplying the x, you're going to divide by 10 on both sides. When you do that, you get 1, and you get x is equal to negative 7. And that should be your answer for that problem. Let's go ahead and look at a last example here. So what we'll do here is we're going to go ahead and multiply or cross multiply, because we have a proportion or a fraction equaling a fraction. So when I do this, I get the following. I get negative 3 times x plus 1.4 is equal to 11 times 5 minus x. So cross multiply, not cross multiply, use distributive property on both sides. So when we do this, we get negative 3 times x, which is negative 3x. Negative times a positive is actually going to be negative, and 1.4 times 3 is going to give us 4.2 is equal to 11 times 5, which is 55, and 11 times a negative x would be negative 11x. Now notice between the two, the negative 11x is smaller, so I'm going to add 11x. I'm going to add 11x to both sides because I want to get rid of the smaller ones. So that gives you 0 on the right side. Well, negative 3x plus 11x is actually different signs. So you subtract the two numbers and you keep the largest sign, which gives you a positive 8x minus 4.2 is equal to 55. So what I'll do from here is I'm going to add 4.2. This is a two-step equation. From here on, this gives you 0. That gives you 8x is equal to 55 plus, which gives us 59.2. Now again, to get that problem done, we have to divide by 8 on both sides. So when we go ahead and do that, we get divided by 8 on the left and divided by 8 on the right. 8 divided by 8 is 1. So we get x is equal to 7.4. So 59.2 divided by 8 would be 7.4. So those are the values you should get for those three examples. We still have two more word problems. We're going to look at how to set them up. And so to start on any of these type of problems, you need to read the questions first. That helps. So let's go ahead and do that. It says, each day the seals at the aquarium are each fed 8 pounds of fish for every 100 pounds of their body weight. If a seal at the aquarium weighs 280 pounds, how much food should the seal be fed? So notice this is a ratio, a comparison of pounds per their body weight. So what we have to do is we have to set up two ratios and then set them equal to each other and then add this up and then solve for the variable. So the first ratio that I'm noticing is the following. It says a seal in an aquarium are fed 8 pounds, okay, of fish for every 100 pounds of their body weight. So that's the first ratio I see. So what I can do is I can actually write that ratio. For every 8 pounds of fish, they get 8 pounds of fish for every 100 pound of body weight. So this is a comparison how much fish they get for how big the seals are. And that's the ratio. That's the comparison of the two numbers. 8 pounds per every 100 pounds of body weight. On the other side of that ratio, we're going to figure out what is one of the things that we're looking for. Now notice what they say. They say if a seal at the aquarium weighs 280 pounds, how much food should the seal be fed? Notice that 280 pounds has to go here because that's the body weight, which is what this is. The 100 is the body weight. Now what we need to know is this unknown, which is the x, and that's how we set up our proportion. From here we would cross multiply like we do with all the other problems. So what happens here is we get x times 100, which is 100x is equal to, and we're going to have 8 times 280. So multiplying those, that will give you 2,240. Again, to get x by itself, we would divide by 100 on both sides. Divide by 100 on both sides. 100 divided by 100 gives you 1. And that gives us that x is equal to 22.4. Now what does 22.4 represent? That represents pounds of fish. Remember, pounds of fish. What this means is that if a seal weighs 280 pounds, we have to give him 22.4 pounds of fish if that seal is to survive in that aquarium. That will be the adequate amount of food for that seal. Alright, let's look at our next example. On the map, the distance between two cities is 4.2 centimeters. If the map scale is 1 centimeter, represents 85 kilometers, what is the actual distance between the two cities? And we see this all the time. When you look at the map, anytime you look at the map, even if you have a GPS in the car, they have little information or little things on the bottom that says, okay, this much represents 1 mile. Okay, and then you can look at, okay, so if I were to travel this far, I would be actually traveling 1 mile. And you got different scales, you got different type of scales. So in our case, the scale that they tell us is that, okay, the map scale here is that 1 centimeter represents 85 kilometers. That is a comparison of two numbers, 1 to 85. That is our comparison. Now, excuse the sound, that's my dogs outside making a little bit of noise. Now, what are we comparing to? Remember, this is 1 centimeter to 85 kilometers. Okay? Kilometers. So now, what I want to do is I want to actually go ahead and do the same comparison. I want to compare centimeters on top to kilometers on the bottom. Well, this is in terms of centimeters, so this has to go on top. And my x, or unknown, is actually going to be in kilometers. And that's what our actual distance is between the two cities. So to rewrite this without the units, we get 1 divided by 85 is equal to 4.2 divided by x. Well, this is simple enough. Just cross multiply. X times 1 would be x. Let me change the color of the pen. You get x is equal to, and then 85 times 4.2 will actually give us 85 times 4.2. We'll get 357. So 357 kilometers. Now, what does that mean? That means if we were looking at this map where the scale was 1 to 85 and the two cities were 4.2 centimeters away, that means in actual distance, or in reality, if we would take the car and drive between that city to the next city, we would be driving 357 kilometers. That concludes our lesson for today. Hopefully you are ready to do the homework. Remember, the homework is on the bottom of this worksheet. So please make sure you do the odd problems only. 1 through 29 odd, 33 through 39 odd. The solutions are on page SA6.